Welcome to the LouCas Baseball Podcast, brought to you by drroto.com. Check out our fantasy baseball draft guide. Start dominating your drafts and your leagues. Today on this episode, we are wrapping up our infield breakdowns with the shortstop rankings and tiers in fantasy baseball. Of course, joined as always by my co-host, Lucas Beery. Lucas, last week we pumped out second base and third base. The week before, catcher and first base. Today, again, shortstop, and it's as deep a position as it comes this season.
Without a doubt, it is the deepest, the sexiest, the best position. If you're only going to listen to one of our positional previews, this is the show here for entertainment value. I will say, though, you cannot wait on this position. You want one of these elite players, maybe even two, if you're willing to fill in middle infield. That's one of the things I've heard people say. Just because it's deep, you can wait on it. I highly disagree, because you're going to be losing out a lot of opportunity of great stats, and there is a cliff to fall off of that we'll hit on later.
There definitely is a cliff to fall off of, and I mean, even the guys in the middle of the shortstop position are still pretty solid. If you can get two of the guys maybe in the 11 to 15 or 16 range, you're still doing okay, but you don't want to wait after that, that's for sure. But we'll get to all of that. We'll start with the elites, with Trey Turner, Fernando Tatis, and Bo Bichette. Doesn't get much better than this, really. Turner, to me at least, is the number one pick of the three guys. Some will argue it should be Tatis Jr., and I will say, from an upside standpoint, no one is better in fantasy baseball than Tatis Jr., but as many people have probably said, he has the shoulder situation, and whether or not he's going to require surgery at some point is a bit of a risk. That is scary enough for me to take Turner over him. Power numbers from Turner are not as good, but the average run scored and stolen bases could be and should be at least as good, maybe even better than that of Tatis. But Bo Bichette is the guy I really want to highlight here the most, because obviously an excellent player, fifth player off the board in most cases, sometimes even sixth if someone takes Vlad Jr. in the top five. But if you look at all the numbers across the board, Lucas, Bichette has a chance to not just outproduce one of these guys, but all of these guys. Not just the Turner and Tatis, but everyone going ahead of him. He can hit 300, he can score 100 plus, he can drive in 100 plus, he can hit 30 homers, and he can swipe 20 to 25 bases. Having the fourth or fifth pick in your draft and being able to take him seems like a huge win, because he really could finish the season as the number one player in fantasy.
I agree. It's not outlandish to say that. He has a really high floor because he's insanely young, hits in an excellent lineup, still has a lot of development left to do, so that also raises his ceiling too. So no matter what you get, I think as long as you can get 23 plus homers, 23 plus steals with around 290 plus batting average, that's going to be good on the floor. And then on the ceiling, he could take a tick up. He's cut his strikeout rate down 2% every single year. He's entering his age 24 season, so he's still ungodly young. And best of all, it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, Bo. But yeah, love it.
Happy birthday, Bo. Yeah, for sure. Any further thoughts on Turner and Tatis? I know Turner we've talked about on another show. Tatis we haven't as much. I mean, there's a lot we can say, but there's also a lot we don't have to say, because it's fairly obvious how good these guys are.
Yeah, we did hit up Turner previously. It's pretty self-explanatory. He's an amazing player. Go for him. Tatis Jr., on the other hand, as I was kind of working on some shortstop ranks and tiers, I did have Bo Bichette ahead of Tatis to start, but then once I started diving into it, just for the safety of avoiding Tatis's shoulder, but then once I got into it here, I tell you, Lou, I actually did put Tatis Jr. ahead of Bo. 21% barrel rate last year. I mean, this guy is just out of control. 40-40 could be in the cards for Tatis Jr. It's all a matter of risk tolerance. And I don't blame anyone that takes Bo ahead of Tatis, but it's a fun little
Yeah, I mean,
there.
Lucas, I'm not seeing that happen. I don't think I have seen that happen, and I'm not even saying that you should do it. It's more so that having the fourth, fifth, even sixth pick in the draft and being able to take Bo Bichette could end up being a massive win for you.
I guess the thing is that I've heard some really well-respected fantasy minds kind of be out on Tatis inside the top 5, which look, he did injure the shoulder multiple times before this year even started. Some people who have knowledge on the situation said that the shoulder had been an issue before last year. So this is not something that's just going to necessarily just automatically go away. Now, hopefully it does, but it's not a guarantee. So I understand someone wanting to swerve off of that risk inside the top 5 is all my point is.
Absolutely. And with your first pick in any draft, you really want to try and avoid the risk as much as you want the
Hmm.
upside. Draft for upside later on. Take a guy that you feel the most confident in producing first round numbers for you. And again, Tatis has the upside to be the very
Yes.
best. And,
And
and a full season is the very best, but that's not a guarantee. Although nothing is.
nothing is, and I am good with him ahead of Bo. I wouldn't, if I were to have that 2 pick in a bunch of drafts, I would probably not keep taking Tatis over and over again. But, 1 or 2 shares I'd be more than happy with. Just wouldn't want overexposure as a final point there.
I'm with you. Next here, the borderline elite. We got Tim Anderson, Trevor Story, and Xander Bogaerts. All studs, just not as good as the top options. Anderson, basically the light version of the top 3 guys. He does everything that they do, just not as well because he hasn't hit 25 homers. He hasn't stolen 20 or more bases since 2018. He also doesn't have that RBI production, but with all that being said, still a 5-tool talent and going to help you in many ways. You can look at Trevor Story, former first round talent in drafts. Could be again if he can regain that 280 to 290 batting average. He's had multiple seasons of 35 homers and 20 plus stolen bases. The thing is, where does he sign once the lockout ends? How will it impact his price, especially because it can sometimes take a player a season or 2 to adjust to not playing half their games in Coors Field should he not re-sign in Colorado. Regardless of all that, though, seemingly a lock for 2020 wherever he plays. And then with Bogaerts, you'll be probably happy if you get 10 steals from him. I wouldn't be surprised if it's only 4 or 5, though. The one guarantee from Bogaerts seemingly is that he's going to hit around 300, score between 90 to 100 runs, and drive in 80 plus, potential for 100 plus depending on his lineup spot. Elite talent that is almost forgotten about at times because of the talent
Mhm.
ahead of him. But all 3 of these guys are excellent, excellent options, assuming you either miss on the first 2 or you want to use Trey at second base and get one of them as your shortstop.
Oh, absolutely. I've done some drafts where in my first 4 picks, I've taken 2 of the players that we've mentioned, and I filled up middle infield right away. I had Tim Anderson as the shortstop, backed him up with Xander Bogaerts the next round in round 4, and I was thrilled with it. Anderson, he's had a history of missing some games the last couple of years. Hamstring issues kind of plagued him last year, but still, though, he put 17 and 18 up for homers and steals, and over the past 3 years, even though people think that he has horrible plate discipline, which is true, his hit duel prevails, and he has a 322 batting average over the past 3 years. So another safe 300 guy with 2020 potential. If Anderson stays fully healthy, I think 2020, 25-25 could be in the cards for the best offense in the AL. Chicago White Sox, if they do what we think. Story, on the other hand, is a little bit tougher to figure out. Me personally, we were talking him up in October as a good buying opportunity for this year, and my opinion still hasn't changed. If you're looking for 25 homers and 20 plus steals, hopefully in a good lineup, maybe Houston. Who knows? We'll see where he goes. But he's also cut down his strikeout rate tremendously since he entered into the league. And even though people may think Story is a free swinging, high strikeout guy, he's right around 23, 24% in that range. So he's a little bit safer than some people might expect as far as that goes. Batting average wise, he is going to take a hit leaving Coors, but 250, 260 with 25-20, hitting third or fourth in a lineup, maybe even 2. That's something I can live with pretty well.
And I mean, not everyone is going to take that hit for leaving Coors. Remember,
Yeah.
I mean, they a lot of guys that play in Coors already take that hit when they go on the road, but not playing in Coors at all, or only playing there maybe anywhere from 3 to 9 times a year, depending on the division he goes to and the team he goes to. I mean, look at DJ LeMahieu, for instance. But then you look at Arenado. Arenado's average took the hit. LeMahieu's didn't. In fact, it actually improved. So there's certain guys who actually not having the Coors hangover effect and then going back into Coors can kind of put together a season that we're not even expecting from them because they're away from that. So as much as it can actually help or hurt, Story could end up being in a better position away from Coors.
I totally agree. I'm glad that you brought up the Coors hangover point, and the reason you take guys like Story here in the second and even third round. I've taken him in the second before and didn't feel bad about it. Is so that you can avoid your Andres Jimenez's and some of your other Raimel Tapia rabbits, and you can just fill in your lineup with your good power bats at the end, and then we can kind of go on to Bogarts if you're ready for that.
Oh, certainly, man. I mean, again, I already said this is a guy that can kind of do a bit of everything, stolen bases, less than a lot of the other guys we've talked about, but might be the safest of these three players.
hmm Yeah, Bogarts is definitely one of my favorite players in the game. He's just unbelievably steady. He really has never let you down in fantasy. I mean, the steals have dried up to more of the 4 to 8 probably range, but elite lineup, elite average, hopefully 25 plus homers. If you're in an auction league, I think I said this with Arenado last week, but if you spend your 25 to $28 on Bogarts, the odds you get disappointed are going to be very low. So he's a super safe bet. The only issue is that shortstop is one of the rare positions where you can load up your stolen bases. But if you can plan around not getting a lot of steals at shortstop, Bogarts is a tremendous pick going around pick 50.
Yeah, certainly is. Anything else on these three before we head to the next tier?
That's it.
All right, next tier, huge edge. We got Marcus Semien, Javier Baez, Francisco Lindor, Jazz Chisholm, and Jorge Polanco, and a lot to like in this tier still. I do feel that a couple of these guys might be getting overdrafted, though. I mentioned it a bit on our second base show with Marcus Semien and Jazz Chisholm. We know Semien was amazing last year with the Jays, but it was a contract year, and it was a best lineup in baseball, arguably, with the Toronto Blue Jays, a division that have very friendly hitter ballparks in the AL East. But now going to Texas, which is not lineup's not even remotely comparable. It's a pitcher's ballpark all of a sudden, and the division itself is much less hitter friendly overall. So I just don't see Semien putting together that same type of season we saw in 2021. And if he's not doing that, you might be overdrafting him. And then quickly with Jazz, sure, we know there could be 20 homer, 20 stolen bases, but he really dropped off after April, especially in the stolen base department. 9 of his 23 stolen bases, LouCas, came in April last year, meaning he only stole 14 over the final 5 months. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not considered a speed guy, in my opinion, at that point. Overall numbers kind of skewed because of his early start, and even with batting average and on base percentage. Being drafted for the speed and power combo, it's possible he gets that 2020, like I mentioned, but his batting average could crush you, and you may not get the amount of steals you're expecting to.
Those are some strong points there with Jazz. You and I do differ on this one a little bit. I'm a bit more in the Jazz camp. There's a few reasons that I'll briefly touch on. For one, 2020 guys are few and far between. There's probably 10 to 12, maybe 15 of them in the draft if you're being generous. And I certainly think that he has a good candidate to get that. He's going to have his playing time. He's the face of the franchise, so I don't think they're going to demote him to AAA Jacksonville or anything. And he does have good power potential. The strikeouts do need to be cleaned up a little bit there. 29% is unacceptable. We need to see that drop down to 25% or better. That is interesting that he didn't run. I know he dealt with some COVID and hamstring issues as the season went on. I think there's a possibility that could play a role, but look, you're taking this guy in the top 75. There is some bust risk, but it's also an upside play as well with the floor of him playing and producing something that you'll like, but he could come up short. I'm still pro Jazz, but yeah, you bring up some good points.
Yeah, I mean, his percentage, I think he was about 75% or so in the steals department. Not bad, but not like great as you would want. The batting average overall, 248, doesn't look as bad, but what if it's 225 or 230? And it's trending that way based on the way the second half of the season went. Trouble getting on base. Be lucky, I think, to get a 300 on base percentage at this point as well, based on his approach. So those things scare me because of where he's going. It's not that I don't like the player; it's I don't like the ATP.
That makes a ton of sense. Listen, As much as I have been on into Jazz, I do have to put my money where my mouth is. I only have one share out of about 12 teams so far, so I will admit that. But I also will admit too that similar to how Luis Robert was going around pick 75 a few years ago, he automatically jumped up about 3, 4 rounds the next year. And listen, I wouldn't be that surprised if Jazz were to do that with a 25-25 monster season when he develops in age 24.
Certainly so. Do you have any thoughts on Semien?
High volume player, 700 plate appearances pretty much every year. So that proves to me that he's an Iron Man, takes really good care of his body, and knows how to manage a full season. That also can go the other way, where sometimes you can just play tons of plate appearances and then just fall off a cliff. But I don't think that I would worry about that, even though we have seen that.
No,
The
he's a
Steve,
good player. He's just not in the
yeah,
same situation he was a year ago. So to expect similar results, I think, is a little optimistic.
it is. If you're okay with 30 homers and maybe 12 steals with 90 and a 260 average, if you're okay with that where he goes, then it's a good deal. But he usually goes before I'm ready. After pick 60, he could be in range for me there, but he doesn't necessarily slip that far.
I haven't seen him slip that far. I've seen him go even
No.
earlier than his ADP, and that's kind of why I'm saying that. And I need to be clear again. I like Semien and Jazz as players. I just don't like
Hmm.
the ADP, especially with guys like Baez, Lindor, and even Polanco. In this tier of players. I have no issues where any of them are going. Baez OBP might not be great, but he can hit around 265, 30 homers, and 15 plus stolen bases, which is very similar to what you just said you could get from Semien. So
Hmm.
that's one example. Lindor coming off a bad year, of course, but he was also once a first round talent with 30 homer and 20 stolen base potential. And Polanco, certainly the most risky of these three guys, coming off an amazing season, though, and has now shown the ability that he can hit 30 homers, swipe anywhere from 9 to 13 bases. My issue with Polanco really is that it's his first 30 homer season and only his
Hmm.
second double digit steal season, so there might be some regression, which is why I mentioned a little bit of risk.
Hmm.
But he's 28, he's in the prime power years, could certainly come close to replicating the 2021 season, has a good lineup spot, and still has some decent hitters around him despite the Twins likely being a bottom dweller.
Yeah, it's a little strange whenever a player pops up into this pretty much elite tier, honestly. I know Jazz was expected because he was a premium prospect, got moved for really an ace in the MLB and Zach Gallen. And with us as dynasty guys, it wasn't a surprise to see Jazz rise this quickly. Polanco, on the other hand, kind of did come out of nowhere. We've touched up on him a little bit, but his pull power transformed him, so he's not really the same player that you used to see. And I actually, in a weird way, think that he's kind of a really high floor guy where he could hit 25 homers. The steals were inefficient, so there's a possibility they give him the red light on the base paths, but I still think that you're looking at 8 to 10 plus steals with a 265 plus batting average with 25 homers and 85 plus and the runs and RBIs. I think he's actually a safe bet here with the dual eligibility as well.
All right, good stuff there, man. You got anything else on this tier?
Yes, we didn't hit into Lindor. I tell
Oh,
you,
sorry. I thought I
oh,
did,
that's
but
oh
uh,
yeah. Oh, you did. I just didn't get a chance to kind of chime in on him.
please do.
This is another one that's a very tricky player to look at. We were talking about Rasmussen before the pod, and Lindor kind of is in the same way. This year he's being bought or drafted. I mean, as if
I just want to say, first off, I gotta say, I bet that's one of the first times in podcast history that Rasmussen and Lindor have been mentioned in the same sentence.
if this lockout doesn't end, who knows? People could talk about whoever knows. But yeah, no, I hear you. With Lindor, the expectation in this draft spot is that he will be a 25 plus home run guy, and that's actually where he was pacing towards, despite rumors of his great demise. He was a bit rougher though on the hitting than we'd really ever seen. So I don't know. There is some risk with Lindor, but with a player of his pedigree and what he's shown, as well as the steals that he's going to provide, I still like him a lot,
Is
but
there as much
I don't
risk
know.
in the fourth round, though?
If the batting average continues to stay pretty low, he could have some risk, but
But
we'll
I
have to
mean,
see.
that batting average is still better than Jazz Chisholm, for
That's true,
instance.
but Chisholm, yes, that is true,
And
and
Lindor
Chisholm,
has a better track record of 2020 than Chisholm does.
he does, and that's where the discount of Chisholm comes into place, as well as the growth upside. But with Lindor, one other kind of final thing that I wanted to throw in there is that not only did he make a bit less contact last year, which is a small red flag, but his park downgrade from Cleveland to New York, it was a bit of a park downgrade.
Definitely.
The big contract, you probably think weighed over his head. It's impossible to prove that, but to me, it makes a lot of sense. I'm still
Also,
good with him.
changing teams and leagues can do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm sounding kind of negative on Lindor. It's just there are a few hesitations with him, but I'm very comfortable with him. But there are some considerations to be had.
Yeah, in round four, would you be okay with 250, 22 homers, and 16 stolen bases?
Yeah, I would take that.
I think that's a relatively close floor for Lindor if he's healthy in a full season. Especially Mets did improve their lineup quite a bit as well.
They did. There is a lot to like here, but his profile has kind of changed a little bit over the past few years when he was a first rounder, and of course, that's why he's dropped a good 50 picks since then. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Bregman is a guy we talked about on the third base show. Similar situation with him because of just one injury. Went from being a top 15, 16 player to going ADP between 75 and 90, right? But let's just not forget how good these players have been. And we're not
hmm
talking about a 33-year-old. Lindor's in his late 20s.
That's true. And we did mention, yeah, we did mention on the last show that Paul Goldschmidt, or maybe it was 2 shows ago, that Paul Goldschmidt did kind of figure out Busch Stadium a bit in his second year. Maybe Lindor does that too, and he knocks down 30 homers and rips off 20 steals if he stays fully healthy. I know that
Well, if
that's
the
not
Mets
impossible.
are a competitive team like we believe they could be this year, it also gives them a lot more incentive to swipe some extra bags, right?
Yeah. Now
So
you've got me a bit more warmed up on him earlier. I was
nah,
just fine
it's
with him at ADP.
it's
Now I'm more
about it's
thrilled.
about their draft price more so than
Yes.
the actual player themselves. The players themselves, if they're in these tiers, they're good players. It's more so the draft price for me. But let's move over to another tier, the rock solid tier with Corey Seager, Wander Franco, Carlos Correa, Dansby Swanson, and Willie Adamas. And I think adoration would be an understatement for this tier. It's not the best, but it's my favorite in terms of value. Any of these guys really could be top 5 to 7 shortstops overall, but you're getting them in the 11 to 16 range in terms of shortstops. So right there, the earning potential is huge. But Seager, an amazing bat, concern similar to Lindor, just opposite leagues, leaving the NL, going to the AL, going to a new team, new league, new ballpark. Difference is Lindor's lineup is good. Seager's, they've made some adjustments, but it's much worse than what he had with the Dodgers. Wander Franco, a rising star. What he did in the final 2 months of 2021 is only a small sample of how good this guy is going to be moving forward. A bit more to be desired in the stolen base and home run department. Could
hmm
come with more major league experience, though. And then Correa, really only falling because he's yet to sign. And where he does eventually sign, surely going to impact the value. Not swiping bags anymore, but can hit for average 25 to 30 homers, 90 plus RBIs, and run potential if he can remain healthy. It has been an issue for him in the past, though. Your thoughts on Correa, Franco, and Seager?
Correa, really good ball player. He's one of the guys that I think is a better real life player than fantasy based on the fact he doesn't steal. And his batting averages have not been that consistent. They've fluctuated over the years. He's a fairly high floor player, but this is not really what I'm looking for unless he were to slip well past ADP, since putting a zero in at steals without the promise of guaranteed batting average like Seager provides is just not something I'm willing to do. Seager, on the other hand, he has had a lot of discussion about his poor health track record, and look, he did have bad health in the beginning of his career whenever he missed a lot of games. But in 2020, I know it was just a 60 gamer, but he still stayed pretty much fully healthy that year. And then last year, his only issue was based on a hit by pitch, so I would consider that into the fluke category. Low strikeout rate, really, really strong average, good power, no steals is a killer though. So that's kind of, unless he slips past ADP, and with the Park downgrade, I was a lot warmer on Seager before he moved to Texas. And with the no steals and the downgrade and Park and lineup, kind of has me a little bit off him, but he's still a hell of a hitter.
Yeah, pure hitter would be my
Hmm.
explanation for him. Wander Franco.
Superstar hitter, really.
Wander Franco is a tough one because we know he has that. Honestly, sky's the limit upside, but he is so young. And you just don't know how these guys are going to adjust in their second year. We know he clearly was able to make adjustments to the way he was being pitched, which is why he finished the season so strongly. But now, all this time, all this offseason, teams are going to be more prepared for him again. Is he
Mhm.
going to be good enough? I know he's way beyond his years in approach, but is he going to be good enough to adjust to those adjustments and continue to adjust to those adjustments across a full first MLB season? I think he can, but I do think there is some risk despite him being such an elite talent.
From a batting average and an OBP perspective, he is going to be a monster. He just turned 21 last week, and he's going to be a killer in that category. However, steals are important to get at shortstop, and he's not necessarily going to provide them. 2 steals last year in 70 games is not cutting the mustard. The 7 home runs that he hit last year, I know you can't just say that's what he's going to do this year, but I'm personally not going to project Wander Franco for over 20 homers next year. He could do that. Players can just explode like we saw Vlad Jr. do, as well as Luis Robert. But with Wander, the lack of power juice and not many steals that I can project, even though he is an amazing hitter at only 21, not interested in him next year unless he were to slip. And even whenever he slipped Lou to pick 70, I grabbed him in one of my drafts at that range as my middle infield. I still didn't really like it. Just didn't sit right with me, even though he slipped a lot past ADP.
Yeah, I mean, hell of a player, but there's certain things he's lacking in his game, at least at this point. Maybe he improves upon those as early as this season. Two other players in this tier. They might present the most value at the position, too. Swanson and
Mm-hmm.
Adamus coming off breakout seasons. We saw them post career highs in homers, RBIs, and runs. We know Adamus will hit for more average. Swanson going to steal more bases. Either way, don't think you can go wrong with either guy. And there's a point in the draft where I was actually, or not this most recent draft for TGFBI, but there was a point in a draft of mine where I was debating on taking them back to back for shortstop and middle infield.
This is my absolute sweet spot. If somehow I missed out on the elites and I don't have a shortstop yet, this is the last opportunity for me to feel amazing about my shortstop. Swanson has been one of my absolute biggest targets this offseason. 25 home run potential, 10 plus steal potential. 250 batting average is a little bit negative, but it's not going to hurt you too much. And really good runs and RBIs because he stays fully healthy. He's a max volume player, and I think he's a wonderful pick here. With Willie Adamas, I think he's a very similar kind of guy, except maybe a little bit less speed, but potentially a little bit better batting average. He also has destroyed outside of Tropicana Field, and he's mentioned that the lighting in the Tropicana Field has caused issues for him. Impossible to prove, but the numbers do support that statement. These are the last 2 shortstops, Lou, that I feel thrilled about starting, and after that, I think a cliff starts to hit personally for me.
Yeah, I think the rest of the players are really more of your middle infield types and not a starting
100%.
shortstop. You ready to get to those players?
Yes, I am, and I will say just one more time, please draft Swanson and Adamus. Those guys are ballers.
Yeah, love them both. Love where they're both going. Next tier is good middle infield options. Well put, my friend. We just said that. Chris Taylor, Ahmed Rosario, Jake Cronenworth, Brendan Rodgers, Gleber Torres, and Luis Urias. Definitely some good options still. I've spoken, I feel like, ad nauseum about Cronenworth on these shows because of his eligibility, so I'm not going to add anything here. Maybe you want to. I'll give you some time to do that. But some thoughts quickly on the other guys. Taylor eligible at second, short,
Hmm.
third in some places, and outfield. Hits in a good lineup, going to play every day, can hit 20 homers, can swipe 10 to 15 bags. Very solid player, and I love that you can pretty much play him anywhere. Positional eligibility for Urias is something I really like. The power numbers he put up a year ago are also very encouraging as well. Was so good in June, August, and September. He's kind of somewhat post hype as well because he's been in the league now for going to be his 5th year, and he's only 24. So called up at 19, probably a little early by the Padres, which is where he was back then. But enough time in the big leagues now to kind of settle in, and I like him around pick 175, 180 or so, which is where you can get him.
Yeah, to hit up on Urias first, he is. I knew he had a really good year. 23 homers is wonderful for a guy whose power was a question mark based on his scouting grades. He only had a 40 to 45 future value on his game power, so to see that get ticked up a notch is really good. His hit tool was always the big selling point, and that kind of maybe he sold out some batting average for power. Either way, I think that he's a solid, safe, steady, triple eligibility guy that you can plug into third base, and then until you can secure someone else, you can have him as insurance policy as a backup to move around. Really good pick there. Even though the steals are not amazing, he's just a solid little bat that should continue to grow as he's still super young. Chris Taylor, you and I are both leading the charge on the Taylor fan club. The strikeouts have gone up a little bit. 29% K rate is a little worrisome, but this guy is patient. 11% walk rate. He has a plan at the plate, and more importantly, he's going to hit an elite lineup. 92 runs scored last year for the Dodgers is amazing. 2010 potential. They signed him for a 4-year, $64 million deal, investing heavily in him, and I think he's going to be a huge part of their team with full-time plate appearances incoming.
I love Taylor, as you know. I have him as many places as possible. Some other guys here in this tier, though, there's Rosario, Rodgers, and Gleber. With Rosario, he could be a 15 homer, 15 stolen base guy in a good year, and I do like him some. Career 272 hitter, batted 282 last season, which was his first full season in Cleveland and in the American League. So if he can repeat that, he might actually end up being an average booster with power and
Hmm.
speed. Uh, Brendan Rodgers coming off his first productive season in Major League Baseball, not going to swipe bags, which will hurt you in the middle infield, but did show power, runs, and batting average abilities. Hit well in Coors, which is nice, but the most encouraging sign for him, something I've talked to you a lot about with him because I've looked at him in a number of drafts, is hitting away from Coors. He was actually better away from Coors. And if he can be consistent like that, this could be a massive breakout player this season, despite the lack of stolen bases. And finally, in this tier with Gleber Torres. I actually wrote in the Roto Masters 2 Facebook chat the other day that this season for Glaber is kind of where he needs to prove it. Andrew McQuiston and I were going back and forth on
Yeah.
him, and I said specifically, is he going to be Jorge Polanco, 30 homers, solid batting average, solid speed with counting stats, or is he going to be Paul DeJong, who basically just exists in the lineup, will hit some homers? We've seen him be elite, but we've also seen him be a huge letdown. It's risky, but also could be very rewarding with Gleber Torres.
Yeah, I'll kind of work in reverse order there. With Torres, the 14 steals just completely cleaned up his poor season. But before that, over his previous 309 games played, he only had 12 steals. So I think relying on double-digit steals is a little risky. Maybe it could hit, but I don't really know what to expect on his steals. And the power, as we know, completely dried up. James Anderson put that this guy was literally the poster child for the juice ball era whenever he cranked 38 home runs back in 2019, and those days are kind of gone. I think if you're looking at him as a 15-10 kind of guy as a floor with upside for plenty more, with a 260 average, and you can live with that hitting for the Yankees, so good counting stats, then he's a solid little pick here. He could go
I have
2010
no
possibly.
shares to be. I just want
Me
to put it
neither.
out there. As the resident Yankee fan on this show, I don't have any Glaber shares this year.
I don't either. I'm not super interested in him, but I think honestly a 10 steal, 15 homer kind of thing is possible. He could do a little bit better, but man, he has not been the same hitter since 2019.
Absolutely not. Far from it. Rodgers and Rosario, what do you got on them?
Yeah, Rodgers, I think you hit it pretty well there. He's a good hitter. He's going to have the benefit of course, despite the fact that people have felt like he's probably been around for over a decade. He's only 25. So, and he hasn't really gotten his reps underneath him at the MLB level due to injury issues plaguing him. I like Rodgers.
Yeah, Rodgers has
Lack of steals,
basically been
love
highly
him.
touted since he was in the womb.
He has, and I kind of liked him more theoretically than I have in the draft table, which I guess is just planning. And then once you get to the table, you don't want to take him as much because like I really thought I was going to be all over him, but his lack of steals are kind of tough. And then on Rosario, this is actually my number one target here in this tier, and I think that he has some honestly explosion potential. You mentioned the fact that he has a good batting average floor, but he also was perfect on the stolen bases last year, going 13 for 13. And the power is not that good, but he's a max playing time player for Cleveland. So I think that he could hit 12 to 15 homers with 20 to 25 plus steals if
Well,
things tick
imagine
up.
imagine even 15 homers. Sorry, yeah, 15 homers, 18 steals, and like 275. All very, very doable for him.
Absolutely. This is a guy that is kind of the definition of post hype, and really his 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 only bad season 2 out of the past 3 years for a fantasy perspective was in 2020, which we should give a pass to
We
anyways.
pretty
So
much throw that out the window, yeah.
exactly. So yeah, kind of summing it up here, Rosario is an amazing steals target if you kind of just need to clean that up a little bit and tack on some more. Rodgers is a high floor hitter who's going to be hitting in cores if you've already addressed steals with some outfielders that are going to run like Cedric Mullins or Randy Arozarena. I'm good with adding Rodgers in his dual eligibility. Torres, on the other hand, maybe he could go a 15-10 kind of a year with a decent average, but I'm just not really interested in him too much unless he were to slip to about 180, then I might start to be tempted.
Definitely, and I mean it's only one league, but I can tell you in my TGFBI league, Torres went around ADP, Rogers went over 40 picks later. I was very surprised by it. Yeah.
I that is wild to see there with him slipping so much. I have one more bonus name that I added into to our sheet here because I didn't have him in there originally. I have to admit that, but big bonus name here, Bobby Witt Jr. He actually belongs in the Adamus Swanson tier, but I needed to mention him here.
No, I got you. Yeah, I'm glad you did. People will probably listen and be like, "How do you not talk about Bobby Witt Jr. on your shortstop show?" I mean, there's obviously a lot to like about his profile, five-tool talent potentially, and does he have third base eligibility right now? I don't think he does, but
No.
he should get it very quickly. Either way, I mean, there's a chance he doesn't start with the Royals in the big leagues. I doubt it though. I think he's going to be there from day one. Even if the average in OBP drops some from the adjustment to the big leagues, I think the power and the speed is there. So I really don't think he's being overdrafted. I just don't have any shares yet.
Interesting. Yeah, I with me personally, prospects, it's been tough the past couple years. And with Bobby Witt Jr., he could absolutely explode and provide even a 25-25 year. I mean, that's possible, but he also could struggle quite a bit too. And the range of outcomes is just too wide for me to pass on him. When I can get a player that was a top 80 overall player last year in Dansby Swanson, who's already done it, who's 28 years old, he knows how to play, he knows how to make adjustments. I would just rather go with a Swanson or even an Adamas over Witt Jr.'s mouth-watering upside.
No question. And they're going, what, 60 picks later?
In some leagues where people are aggressive on Witt, but Witt has a wide range. You have people that are kind of like me that are a little bit patient with him or passive rather, and then you have some where he's gone even in the fourth round I've seen this year. So
See, that is crazy to me, but I'm going to say there's at least one of 15 people or one of 12 people, depending on your league size, who are willing to take Wade in the top 100, and that's why I have no shares of him, because I'm
I
not.
tell you though, at ADP, I would rather have Witt Jr. and his steals upside than Wander Franco. That's not really much of a take or anything because I've heard a lot of people say that, but I
Well,
just
yeah,
wanted to
that's
throw that
not
out
even
there.
you saying that Wander Franco's not better than Witt Jr. It's just saying that you want the steals upside.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's something you got to think about. Next here, the high upside what ifs. We got Eugenio Suarez. Brandon, Crawford, O'Neill, Cruz, and Gavin Lux. And although he doesn't hit for a high average, Suarez still has a ton of power, good ballpark, good lineup, and has that unique position eligibility too at shortstop and third base. I like him at third base a lot if I have waited to fill that position, but I think he's kind of best suited as a power hitting middle infielder, especially if you've kind of taken care of stolen bases in other areas during your draft. Crawford had his best season of his career last year at the age of 34. I don't expect him to necessarily repeat the power, certainly not the stolen bases, but he's a guy that's locked into playing time. You can draft him outside of the top 200, and he's a very solid choice for your middle infield later in the draft. And then quickly with Cruz and Lux, they're guys who I have no shares of yet, but it's not because I'm not interested. I just haven't been willing to take them at their ADP. Cruz has a nice power speed combo, could be a 15-15 type of player. Lux has a chance to finally get consistent playing time. People seem to be kind of passing him by now that he appears to be a post-hype prospect, but he did finish 2021 strong. And again, Muncy is injured, Seager's gone, the NLDH. There's a really good chance he can play every day, and I believe there's still a lot of upside in him.
Yeah, this is still a good grouping of batters to add to your team. Crawford is maybe underrated this year. I know that if we were playing, 10, 15 years ago, someone sees 24 homers and 11 steals, he would have gotten drafted a lot higher. Now that we have all the sabermetrics and analytics, people know better. But still, if he's playing, 6 days a week plus for the Giants, hitting in a good spot in the lineup, I think 20 and 10 is very possible, and people are just casting him aside. Don't agree there. I think he's reasonable. Suarez, on the other hand, is a lot tougher to kind of figure out. I think that we could see a batting average bounce back. His BABIP was unbelievably low at 224 when on his career he's more of a 299 guy. That's not probably what he is anymore since he's a bit older, slower, and strikes out a bit more than he used to. But I think a 230 and 30 plus homer year is in the cards, and with dual eligibility, that's really good to be able to slot him all around in your lineup. And then I'll kind of be brief on the last two guys, O'Neill, Cruz, and Lux. Cruz has intense upside. I don't really know what to expect from him, but his power is 80 grade raw power per Fangraphs. And look, this guy's stolen plenty of bases in the minors, so he could easily do it again for Pittsburgh at the big leagues. I don't know, though. It's just at that point, he's still going around players like AJ Pollock and just a bunch of other really more proven guys that I'd rather trust, but I can see the upside with Cruz. With Lux, lastly, the playing time looks to finally be entrenched for him. He hasn't necessarily forced the Dodgers' hands to get a regular role. His career WRC plus is below league average, 14% below league average, so that's a little iffy. He doesn't really have much in the steals department. He doesn't really have much in the batting average or power department, but he also hasn't had full-time playing time to get his legs under him. Still, at the end of the day, based on the Fangraphs scouting report, he was a 70 grade prospect, and those players will always catch my eye. But for whatever reason, I just haven't felt the need to go for Lux because I just don't see what's the standout tool per se.
Fair enough on both those guys. We ready for that final tier?
Yes, I am.
All right. The leftovers: J.P. Crawford, Miguel Rojas, Gio Urshela, Josh Rojas, Paul DeYoung, Andres Jimenez, Nicky Lopez, Ha-Seong Kim, and Joey Wendell. And there's maybe 4 or 5 players I'm going to have ownership of in this tier. Crawford, Urshela, maybe one share each of Jimenez, Lopez, and Wendell. I look at Urshela, a solid defender, above average bat, plays on a good team. Crawford kind of entering his prime on an up-and-coming Mariners team, seeing the batting average and on-base percentage improve every season. Not stealing as many bags as you would hope, not going to hit for much power either, but I would probably take him as a bench bat in case the power does develop more and the steals maybe do develop more, as he again just has more experience in the big leagues. Now with the other 3 who I would have interest in. Jimenez, if given full time at bats, might be a 10 homer, 10 stolen bases guy. Certainly can be helpful, but not if he bats 220 like he did a year ago. Lopez, intriguing if you want late speed. Problem is he has no power at all, and prior to 2021, he never even hit above 240 in the big league. So it's kind of hard to trust a guy that he can repeat a 300 average he put up a year ago when the jump was 60 plus points in average. And then Joey Wendell quickly, most accomplished of the three guys I've just mentioned. Isn't going to be great at anything, but he can kind of help you a little bit everywhere. Career 271 hitter, can hit double-digit homers, can swipe 8 to 12 bases. Is going to a worse ballpark and a worse lineup in Miami compared to where he was in Tampa the past 4 years. So that is something you have to keep in consideration.
Wow, we've really hit the dregs here if Joey Wendell's the most proven of those guys. No, that's good stuff though, Lou. Wendell is, these guys are really mostly just reserve bats, insurance policy, DCs, and draft and holds. You just need someone to plug in there. JP Crawford, gold glove guy, he's going to keep his job. Not a lot of upside, but if he does actually continue to lead off since his plate skills are pretty good, that's some sneaky runs scored. I've seen some arguments out there that say that he's being overdrafted around pick 300 because he doesn't have much upside. And sure, you could go for a Nick Ahmed or an Elvis Andrus who have a job later, but JP Crawford ain't going to lose his job. He's still young and great glove. Rojas is similar. He's very bland, but if you can go for a 10-10 season, he's the heart and soul of the team. He's not going to lose his job in Miami either. As far as Gio, we have hit on him in the third base spot. I've started to be a little bit more thinking that he is going to preserve his job since his defense is really good. So I'm happier with him. And then as far as new guys that we haven't talked about, because we'd hit up Rojas previously, as well as Lopez, I believe. With Paul DeJong, he actually started working with a new hitting coach this year, and there could be a serious development there. I believe the hitting coach that he was working with had worked with Justin Turner, if my memory serves correctly, and he also has proven 30 home run power. It was with a poor batting average, but a player who can hit 30 bombs going this late, and he's only 28, 29 years old. There's a bit of intrigue there for me. Ha-Seong Kim, last but not least, as a Swiss Army knife. He's going to get more accustomed to life in the United States, coming over from Asia over to the U.S. is always a big challenge. And I think as a reserve, just kind of slot him in as a backup third baseman, shortstop, and second baseman. I think Ha-Seong Kim could provide a little bit of power, a little bit of speed, and hopefully some good playing time if the Padres don't continue to bolster their roster on the hitting side.
All good points, man. Anything else on any of this tier?
Not on this tier, no.
All right. Well, I guess at this point I'll tell you good luck for the rest of your TGFBI draft. Of course, next week we'll be back with 2 outfield shows in the middle of the week. They'll be out by Friday. But any final thoughts here in general?
No, I think that this is a very rich position, but it's also a position that you need to have a really good plan on. We talked about a handful of players that didn't provide steals, and that being a negative, whether it was Brendan Rodgers or a Corey Seager to kind of go up and down the spectrum there. So it's important to try to get steals from this spot if you can. And last but not least, just really don't wait much past Swanson and Adamus. Now, if you have a great feeling about a Cronenworth is going to go off or something like that, I'm sure you can feel free to do that. But with me personally, there's not a chance that I'm going to be willing to wait past Swanson and Adamus, because after that, I think you're just going to take too much of a hit at the best position out there in fantasy.
All great points, man. Great stuff. I will say, I believe the Baseball Pods Twitter podcast bracket begins next week. LouCas Baseball is on the bracket, so if you want to go support LouCas and I, look out for that. I'm sure we'll be retweeting stuff. We're coming in as underdogs, so we could use all the help we can get. But this has been the LouCas Baseball Podcast Shortstop Rankings Edition, brought to you by drroto.com. Check out our fantasy baseball draft guide. You will not be disappointed, folks. Great work by everyone involved there. I'm Lou Landers with co-host Lucas Beery, and thanks for listening to the LouCas Baseball Podcast. We'll catch you next time.